I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record at this point, but I am so excited about the latest release of GenerateBlocks Pro 2.2 Alpha. This is going to give us two new blocks. This includes the site header block and the navigation block, and it's something that I've been waiting for a very long time. We can get some pretty decent headers inside of GeneratePress, especially if you're comfortable with tweaking around with the CSS. But with these new blocks, we're able to build out our entire header using the GenerateBlocks system, which means we have all the styling controls we could ever want, and it really unlocks being able to build headers that you'd never be able to do inside of GeneratePress before. So in today's video, I'm going to be building out a fairly simple header that's got a few cool tricks up its sleeve. It's something that we really wouldn't have been able to do inside GeneratePress before, but now with all these controls and the navigation block inside GenerateBlocks, this is totally doable, all from right within the editor. If you're interested in a very first look at this new block, then stick around and let's get started. So the header we're going to try to recreate today is this one on the Google I/O 2025 page. Now it looks pretty simple from the start, but it's got a couple really cool tricks up its sleeve, especially as we go into mobile. There are things that I wouldn't even know how to do in the old system or using GeneratePress's header controls, but with the GenerateBlocks controls, we can knock these out pretty easily. So let's take a look at how this is structured. So we have a blue background inside the navigation here. It's a full width navigation going all the way to the edge of the pages. We start with the logo, of course, and then the menu left aligned over here next to it. We of course then have a big gap in between all of that, and then two buttons over to the right, the sign in and register now button. So all this is fairly simple, and we could do this in the GeneratePress system. We would just have to add some extra CSS to get everything to kind of line up this way. But where this gets really interesting is when we go into the inspector and we start looking at the responsive settings of this header. So there's one thing that I want you to notice right away, and that's this register now button. As we get down to their mobile breakpoint here, you can see the register now button disappears. So that's one thing we're definitely going to have to take care of. The other thing is over here with the logo and menu. You can see we have the logo on the left, the menu on the right. But as we bring this down and get to the mobile breakpoint, the menu switches over to the left with the logo on the right. So that's another thing that we're going to have to set up, and one of those that I'm not sure how I might have done inside GeneratePress. Now when we open up this menu, we can see we have this slide out navigation here that only takes up part of the screen. After inspecting this, it looks like they have this set to be like a max width of 300 pixels. But on top of that, we're getting this black version of the logo showing up here. If you remember, the regular header has the blue background with the white logo, but here in the flyout menu, we get a new logo with a black color that's showing up inside of this menu here. Obviously a little border to divide it as well. We can see there's a bit of an overlay here on the site. We're going to do this slightly differently just to make it as easy as possible. And we have some nice rounded corners on the top right and bottom left of this little slide out menu here. We're going to be able to recreate this menu almost perfectly here inside GenerateBlocks. So let's jump in and take a look at how it's done. So I have this demo install all set up, and it is running the GenerateBlocks Pro 2.2 Alpha 1. So what we need to do to create a header is go into our elements here. So I'm going to go in here to elements and create a new element, and we're going to choose the element type of block. Now we'll go ahead and hit create, and let's just go check the front end of the site so you can see what's there before we get started. We just have the typical menu that's coming from the GeneratePress theme. So I'll go ahead and close that out. We'll go back in here into the editor. Now I'm going to call this Google I/O header. And we'll go into our element, and here over in the element type, we're going to change this to site header. Now we'll go down to the bottom and we choose our location where we want to display this header, and I'm just going to say the entire site. So with this update, we're actually getting two new blocks. There's the navigation block, but there's also a site header block. So the first thing we need to do is go in here and add this site header block. I found that by just searching for site here, and we'll go ahead and add that to the page. Now, there's not a whole lot to this block other than the fact that we have the controls here to choose a sticky header. So we have the option of no sticky header, always sticky, or sticky when scrolling up. So it's nice to use the site header element because those controls are already built in where they're not built into the typical container section. So let's go ahead and go into our settings here. I'm not going to worry about setting up classes for all this. This is kind of a global element. It's a template that we're going to reuse throughout the site. It's only going to be created once, so no real need to create classes on this unless you just wanted to keep things really organized. And for the sake of this demo, I just want to make sure that it's nice and easy. So let's go ahead and go in here to our background colors. Now I'm just using the default colors that come with GeneratePress. That's close enough for me. We're using a blue header. We have a blue color here inside of our palette. Now I do want to go ahead and change our text color to white here since we're going to have white text on top of all of it. And then we need to set up some spacing inside this. We're not going to need an inner container because this is a full width header section. So I'm just going to go in here to our spacing and we'll do maybe 16 pixels on the top. I have a clamp function I use for my left and right padding, which you might have seen in my starter site video. And then we'll just go ahead and put 16 pixels on the bottom just so we have a little bit of space to work with. So if we go back and take a look at this header, we can see that we need these things grouped together and these things grouped together over here. So I know the first thing I want to do is just put 2 containers inside of this header. So I'll go ahead and do 1, and I'll use my keyboard shortcut here to duplicate that and make 2 different containers. Now I need to put those next to each other. So I'm going to go back here to my site header. Under layout, I'm going to change this display to flex, which is automatically going to put these 2 next to each other, which is perfect. Now I do want these to be spaced out where the container here on the left is all the way to the left and the container on the right is pushed all the way to the right. And we can achieve that by going here under alignment and changing this justify content to space between, which is just going to push these 2 containers to the outer edge here. Now inside this left container, we have 2 different elements. We have the logo here and then the navigation here. So let's go ahead and get those into our page first. Now I'm going to wrap that logo inside of a container. That just gives me a little bit of extra flexibility. So I'll go ahead and add that container. We'll go to our images here and I'm going to go into our media library, and I've already uploaded the white and black versions of this logo. So I'm going to go ahead and select that white version and go ahead and get it into our page. Now on the logo itself, I do like to change this display to block. There's just a little bit of extra margin that comes at the bottom of the images. And as soon as you change that to display of block, that margin will go away. Now back into this left-hand container here. In fact, let's go ahead and rename this. Let's just call this left, and we'll go to our other one over here and we'll call it right, just so we can keep track of where everything is. Now inside of our left container, I want to add our navigation. So if I just search for nav, you'll see this blue icon here for the GenerateBlocks navigation block. We'll go ahead and add that to the page. And if we go here into the settings, we can see it's automatically brought in my Google I/O menu. I do have 2 different menus on this site, so we can see that we can switch back and forth between these pretty easily, but we're going to want to use that Google I/O menu, so that's perfect. Now, of course, these 2 need to go next to each other. So again, we can go to this left container here into our settings panel under layout, and we can change this display to flex. Now I want to make sure that these are centered vertically here. So I'm going to choose the align items, align center, which is going to put these nice on a row here. Right now, there's no space in between our 2 elements here, this container that's wrapping our image and the navigation itself. So back here on our left container where we've just set it to flex, I'm going to go down here into our flex layout and I'm going to give this maybe 24 pixels of column gap just to space these things out nicely. Okay, now that we got those on the page, I want to handle the buttons over here on the right. Now you've probably seen buttons done a million times, so I'm not going to do a whole bunch of design lessons here. We're just going to go ahead and add a button here. We'll do this one for register now, and I need to move that over to the right. Now for our sign in button, I want to go ahead and get rid of the background, so I'm going to make that clear. We'll go to our typography settings and make sure that that is set to our base 3, which is our white color. We can click on the hover button here, which is going to take control of the hover and focus states. On the Google example, there was really no hover effect, so I'm going to do the same here and just make sure our background is transparent and the text color is set to our white color. Now, typically I like there to be some kind of hover state for these, but we're just following along with what Google had here. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a blank link, and that'll get us good enough for this button. Now, as far as the register now button, we had a few different changes on it. The background itself is white, so we'll go ahead and change that to our base 3. The typography is black, so we'll change that to our var contrast here. And we have a big border radius on this, so I'm going to go down into borders. I'm going to lock all my border radius values together, and I'm just going to do 100 VW, which will just make sure it completely rounds off this button. So now we got things looking a little bit closer. However, there's too much padding inside of these buttons. If we go back and look at the Google ones, they're pretty narrow. So I'm going to go ahead and grab both of these buttons just by holding Shift and clicking on both of them. We can see they're both selected over here now. And I'm going to go into my spacing here for the padding, and I'm going to change this up a little bit by just changing the top padding to 0.5 em, and we'll do 1.5 em on the left and right. This just makes our buttons a little bit more similar to what we had in the Google example. You can see here when I'm hovering over it now, we obviously forgot to take care of the hover states on this one. So we'll go back into this button, click onto hover. And in this example, we're actually changing that background color to black and make sure that that text color is set to white. And now we have this nice hover effect. Now they do add a little bit of shadow to that button, so let's go ahead and be consistent here and work on that as well. We'll go down here to our effects, and I first want to go ahead and give this a transition, just so when we add that shadow, it comes in nice and smooth. We'll change that to 0.25 seconds and have it ease in out. Then we can go back into our hover here and we'll add a box shadow. I'm gonna go ahead and change this to our black color and just bring down the opacity quite a bit, maybe 0.25. We'll set a 0x offset and we'll go down to our Y and maybe do it 4 pixels, a blur of 10 pixels and change our spread to 0. Now when we hover over that, we see we get just a little bit of blur. I'm second guessing myself now. I don't think that button actually changes to black when we hover over it. Let's just double check that. No, it looks like we just get the box shadow and not the black background like I was thinking. So let's go ahead and fix that. We'll just go ahead and put this background color back to white and the text color back to black. And now when we hover over the button, we see we get that little shadow that kind of peeks out of the bottom, which is perfect. Now you might be noticing that all of our items aren't in alignment here. The buttons are kind of pushed to the top and all this is kind of centered. We can go back and fix that here under the site header in our display flex settings. Here under alignment, we'll just change that align items to center, which is going to center everything vertically inside that container. So I think we have everything set up for the desktop version here. So let's go ahead and publish this and let's go take a look at our site on the front end to see what we've gotten accomplished thus far. We'll go ahead and paste in this link and we can see we have our logo on the left. We have all of our menu items here and then our buttons over here on the right hand side. Now, I did notice that we didn't link this to the homepage, which we need to take care of. And they also used a bit of a thicker weight font on the buttons and menu items here inside the Google layout. And maybe even the font is quite a bit smaller. Now, I'm not worried about making this pixel perfect, but let's make those little tweaks just so we can get it a little bit closer and explore this navigation element a little bit more. So as we drill into the navigation element here, we have lots of options inside of it. I think I'm gonna have to do multiple videos on this navigation element itself because there are a lot of moving parts here. However, in this case, what we're wanting to select here is our menu item, which is gonna select any of these items. We'll go into the typography and let's change that font size to maybe something like 1 rem, which is just gonna make it a little bit smaller. And now we can change the font weight to maybe 600, which is gonna make it a little bit thicker. And that looks a little bit closer to what we had. Now I wanna match that on our buttons over here. So we'll just select both of those buttons again. Under our typography, we'll change that to 1 rem and the font weight to 600, which is just gonna make those match the rest of our navigation. We'll go ahead and save those changes and let's refresh it on the front end. And I think that's looking a little bit closer. Now, of course, if we go in here and inspect this and we start taking a look at the responsive settings, these are almost colliding right before it collapses, but it's actually collapsing in a pretty good place. Now, we have the problem of our register button is still showing and we need to flip-flop the order of this logo and hamburger menu. Of course, we have some styling to do to that hamburger menu as well. But while we're here, let's go ahead and open this hamburger menu and we can see we have a full overlay with a black background. Definitely a lot of styling changes we're gonna need to make here as well. But let's just tackle everything one by one, starting with getting rid of this register now button. So I'm gonna go back in here into the editor. We'll go over here to our register now button and I'm gonna go down to our mobile breakpoint, which is where our site is going into this mobile navigation with the hamburger menu. All I'm gonna do for this register now button is change the display to none. And if we save this and refresh on the front end, we can see our register now button is gone as soon as we get to that mobile breakpoint, which is exactly what we were looking for. Next, let's work on flip-flopping the order of this logo and hamburger menu icon. So we'll go back in here into the editor and we'll go over to where we have our left container here. Now we already set this to flex, which is really handy because now we can just grab this navigation, go into our flex settings here under layout, flex layout, and we can change this order to -1, which is just gonna move the navigation over to the left and the logo over to the right. Again, let's just save this and keep checking our work as we're going. If we refresh on the front end here, we can see we now have everything in the order we need with the menu button over here on the left and the logo on the right, which is perfect. So as we get back to our desktop view, things snap back into place. And here the menu moves over to the left. Now we can go ahead and work on some of the styling of this hamburger menu button. If we look back at the Google site, we can see they just have a transparent background with the white SVG menu icon on top of it, and we can recreate that pretty easily. So we'll go back into the editor here, and to adjust that toggle, we go here to our menu toggle. Now I'm going to go into our backgrounds first, and we'll just make sure this background color is set to transparent. Now here under our typography, this is inheriting that white, but I'm going to go ahead and just set it to white here for now, just so we're sure that we're using the color from our palette. Again, we'll go ahead and save those changes, refresh on the front end, and now we can see we have a white button here. Once that button is active, we're getting this gray color here, and we definitely don't want that, so let's see how we can change that. Make sure that we still have that menu toggle selected. If we go to our settings here, we actually have controls for the background and text of this menu button. I actually changed it here inside of the typography and backgrounds, but it might be easier to just use these settings here where we can set the background to be transparent, make sure that it's transparent when it's active and when it's hovered here. So we'll go ahead and set those all to transparent, and then we can set the text to our white color from our palette on each of these states as well. And now whenever we save this and check it on the front end, we can see when we click on it, it's not getting that gray fill here, which is perfect. At this point, we just need to start working on this overlay menu here. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do. In the Google menu, it's a white background. It's only filling up part of the screen. We have the different logo in here, so we got a lot of stuff we need to cover. We'll go back into our element here, and we'll just tackle this one by one. So let's take a look at what our menu looks like in the editor here. If I click on that hamburger icon, we can see that this is taking up the full screen, and those settings are actually found here under the navigation. Under the mobile menu type, we have full overlay or we have partial overlay. Now, partial overlay is going to bring that overlay down below your header, which isn't really what we want. So we're going to leave this on the full overlay here. We also have our mobile menu transition. We're going to come back to that here in a few, but that's something to note that's here inside the settings on the navigation block itself. Now to get this background color set and to make sure that it's not taking up the full screen, I'm going to go here to our menu container block, which is here inside the navigation and just next to that menu toggle. What I want to do here is set that background color first, which is here inside the settings. We have our mobile background and our mobile text. So I'll just open this up and we'll change that background to white and our text to black, which is going to take care of that first step for us. Now we need to worry about the width here, so I'll go into my settings under sizing, and for max width, I'm going to do just like Google did and set that to 300 pixels of max width. So let's go ahead and save those changes. Again, we'll refresh on the front end, and now when we open that up, we can see this menu is stopping after 300 pixels, which is perfect. So let's go ahead and make the rest of our tweaks here. We know we have that border radius on the top right and bottom right, so I'll just go ahead and change this to maybe something like 16 pixels, which will give us a bit of a border radius. And now we need to tackle that overlay that happens on the Google menu where the rest of the site kind of gets dark here. Now, we could probably do this with some pseudo elements and really do it right. However, there's a pretty easy trick to give us this same effect without going to all that hassle. So I'm just going to go in here to Effects, and under Box Shadow, I'm going to give us a big box shadow to work with, which will just cast a shadow over the rest of the website. So I'm going to go ahead and go in here to our contrast color, which is this black color. We'll leave the X offset to 10 as it is now, but we'll change this Y offset to 0 because we don't want this to move up or down. Where we really want to make a difference here is in the blur. So I'm just going to change this from 5 to maybe something like 300, which is just really going to space this blur out and make this box shadow take up the rest of the site. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like on the front end so we can get a better look here. We'll go ahead and open our menu now, and now you can see there's a bit of an overlay on the rest of this site. It's coming from the box shadow. It's not a true overlay here. Like I said, we could do that with some pseudo elements, but right now I think this works pretty well, and it gives us that same effect with really half of the work. So you might be wondering where our close button is gone, and it's still here. It's actually right underneath here. You can see if I click on it, it will show up there. It's just because we've set that menu toggle to be white. Now it's white on white, so we can't see it. We can actually control this inside of GenerateBlocks. However, we do need to find the class that's being used on this close button. So I'm going to use my tool here to go ahead and grab that button. We'll drill down inside of the button until we find this GB menu close icon class. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy that to my clipboard. We can see that the close button and the open button have unique classes, which definitely comes in handy here. So we'll go back inside of the editor. We'll make sure we're selected on that menu toggle, and we'll go in here under our classes, and we're gonna go ahead and create a new class here. Now I'm just gonna type in a period and paste in that class that we copied to our clipboard, the GB menu close icon, and we'll go ahead and hit create. Now here under the typography, all I need to do is change that text color to our black color. And if we go ahead and save this, refresh on the front end, and open up our menu, we can now see our close button here because we've set that typography to be black. Our close button is black, but our menu button here is still white, which is exactly what we needed. And next we need to get that logo inside the menu here. So let's head back into the editor, and to add that image in there, I'm just gonna go in here underneath my entire header for now. We're gonna add a container because I do wanna wrap this image inside of a container, and then inside of that container, I'll add an image block. We'll go into our gallery and find that black logo and go ahead and enter it into our site. Now, this is going to be our mobile logo, so I'm just gonna go ahead and change this to mobile logo, just rename it here so we can keep track of everything inside of our list view. Now we want this to be inside of our menu container, so I'm just gonna go ahead and drag this up until we get it inside the menu container here, which is perfect. However, if we go back to our desktop version, we can see this logo is showing on our desktop version, which is definitely not what we want. However, GenerateBlocks has already thought about this and created a class that we can add to elements if we only want to show them in the mobile view. So if we go back here to our menu container and to our settings, we can see here to add the GB menu show on toggled class name to your blocks that you only want to show inside the toggled mobile menu, which is exactly what we want with this logo. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that class here. We'll go back to our mobile logo container. That's the wrapper I put around this image. And we'll go down here to advanced, and we're just going to go ahead and add that GB menu show on toggled class to it. At that point, we're not seeing it here on the desktop version, but when we go down to our mobile version here and open up the menu, we can see the logo is actually showing up at the top of our screen now, which is perfect. However, we do need to work on the alignment here, and I'm gonna have to get a bit magic numbery here, but I think we can make this work pretty well. I know that on all of our buttons here, we have 20 pixels of left and right padding. So I'm just gonna go in here to the container under spacing, and I'm gonna do 20 pixels of left and 20 pixels of right padding, which is just gonna get it nice and aligned. Now we wanna align it with this button as well. And after playing around with it, like I said, it's a bit magic numbery, but I found that if I put 28 pixels of top and bottom padding, that ends up getting it pretty well aligned with our close button. Now the last thing we need to do to this container is add the border at the bottom of it, which is just that faint line that separates the logo up here with the rest of the menu. So we'll go down here to borders, we'll unlock all these, we'll add a 1 pixel light gray border to the bottom of that box, and let's go ahead and save this and track our progress on the front end. We'll refresh this page here. Everything's still looking good on desktop. And as we get down to our mobile and open up this menu, we can see we have our logo up here, the faint border, and then all of our menu items down below it, which is perfect. However, when we open and close this menu, it happens quite abruptly, and I'd like to use some of those transition settings to open up this menu nicely. So let's go back into our editor here. We'll go into our navigation block and make sure we scroll up and click on this settings wheel. Down here, we have the mobile menu transition. And from that, I'm just gonna choose slide and fade right. This by default has a 2000 millisecond transition speed. I did 0.25 seconds on everything else, so maybe I'll just change that to 250 milliseconds just to make it even on all of our transitions. Go ahead and save that and refresh again. And now we can see our menu slides in nicely from the left-hand side, and then when we close it, it slides back out all the way to the left, which looks absolutely fantastic. There's just two more little things I want to clean up. We never linked this logo back to the homepage, so I want to make sure to take care of that. The GeneratePress system will do that automatically, but when we're using the GenerateBlocks setting to set up our header, we need to manually do that. And the other thing I noticed is when I got this really tight, as we get down here around 340, we start having these menu items collide again. There's not too many device sizes this small, although I'll usually test down here to about 320 or 325. I think we can fix this collision by just reducing the amount of gap between our menu and our logo, which we set earlier at 24 pixels. I think if we reduce that, we could keep this collision from happening and it would be a pretty easy fix. So we'll go back in here one more time into the editor. I'm going to go back to our desktop version here, select our logo. We'll go into our settings here and we're just going to change this link to a /, which will just take people back to the home page. Now to reduce that gap in between our navigation and the logo itself, we'll go back into this left container here. We'll go into our settings and make sure we're down here at mobile. And if we go into our flex layout settings here, we can see that we're inheriting that 24 pixels of gap. I think if I change this down to something maybe like 8, we could avoid those collisions from happening. We'll go ahead and save that, refresh on the front end. We can see that spacing is a little bit tighter now, which I think looks better anyways. And we'll see if we can get down to about 325. So yeah, right here at 325, we're still good. About 322, they do start to collide, but like I said, there's very few devices getting that small. We could always go in and reduce the padding on the left and right. We could reduce the size of the logo. There are all kinds of things we could do, and we can create custom media queries in order to do it. However, I think this is a really great navigation and something that I just wouldn't have been able to pull off using the old GeneratePress settings, but it's actually pretty simple to do here with the new header block and navigation block inside GenerateBlocks. It's really thanks to all the controls that we have inside the style panel where we can set all these things to flex and rearrange them however we need to. This just creates a really nice modern header that I'm excited about using on projects going forward. Now, we only scratched the surface on the GenerateBlocks navigation block. We didn't go through a ton of the controls that are built in or even build out anything like a drop-down menu. So I think I'm gonna have to make a lot more videos on this subject, but after spending some time with it, I would really encourage you to just get around in there and start playing. What I did was go scour the internet, find some different navigations that I liked, and then tried to rebuild them using these new tools. It took a little bit of time to get my mind wrapped around all the controls and where everything should go, but once it clicked, I found myself being able to build out just about any kind of navigation I wanted to. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video, and if you want to see some upcoming videos I will have on the navigation block, then make sure you hit subscribe. I would appreciate all your comments and suggestions down in the comments box below, and we'll see you in the next video.